recording going on. So as every week, we will continue in the same format today. We will have a 5 minute quick tech topic as a discussion, and Jeff and myself will talk about cloud migration. But however, this forum being predominantly focused on your questions, your clarifications, and anything that you want to know about data management and about how Veritas can help, is where we open up for our question and answer session. I do have a few questions that have come overnight, so we will make sure that we address those questions as we go along. And feel free to use the chat window and ask your questions. Happy to talk through questions relevant to session today, as well as we have any other questions pertaining to data management. And for today's session, we have Jeff Coley. Jeff is our Director of Engineering and Architecture in ANZ. And Jeff will help us address the questions, and he's also going to help us drive a part of this conversation today with cloud migration. And of course, to introduce myself, I am a solutions engineer with Veritas, and my specialty is information availability and cloud disaster recovery. So with that, I will get onto the topic for today. And the topic is cloud migration. Now, cloud migration has several interpretations and references, but I'm going to talk through cloud migration, and with Jeff's help, we will articulate what that migration journey looks like, what are the considerations that come in place, and how Veritas technologies can help you in the overall journey. And of course, that's when we also try to help and address the questions we have. So with that, I'm now going to talk about drivers of transformation, and I'll get Jeff to help us with the key drivers of transformation. Jeff, why would people consider migrating to cloud in the first place? Jeff, can you hear us all right?
Wonderful, thanks.
There we go.
Wonderful, thanks, Amit. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, I'm in my best work from home clothes this morning. My suit is on, my jacket. Look, drivers for transformation, especially around cloud, this is something that comes up quite a lot. And I think whilst this is perhaps a bit of a Veritas-centric slide, I think it's also quite relevant. So, look, things that I end up discussing with, again, the technology strategists, chief technology group forums, chief data officers and the like, talk about performance. Talk about traceability between IT services and the business is more important than ever. How do you measure that? How do you baseline it? How do you understand the value of IT services to the business or the value of the data that's generated? How do you map that to a life cycle? Now, we're seeing a number of different prudential standards come out. In some cases, it's a slow bleed. In some cases, we're seeing, especially around APRA, certain elements that have been in market for a while that talk around the notion of having a data life cycle. Analytics is another key area. IT operations analytics is a massive growth area. You go and look at the likes of people such as Splunk. But fundamentally, having a data management framework, being able to measure how everything's correlated together, both from an infrastructure and applications and IT service perspective, also considering compliance, risk and governance is really, really key. I was talking to a customer this morning who was making mention around, how do I get to cloud? How do I baseline what I've got? Because as a business, we're talking about, transformation to cloud, the path to cloud. We're going to be cloud first or cloud fifth or cloud right. And fundamentally, getting that baseline, understanding what your current composition is and understanding your cost position before getting to cloud is becoming something that we're starting to talk more to customers about. And of course, we've got the right technology and we can help with the right processes and practices to help with that. So the advent of digital or digital transformation means data and IT services are becoming increasingly more fragmented. Organisations also do a good job of task-based automation, but they don't necessarily do a great job of IT service-based orchestration. And again, that's something from a services and a technology perspective we can help with. It's not about technology in silos. It's not about technology in a data center or in the cloud. In many cases, it's both. And of course, all of this is bringing about challenges in terms of taking a traditional ITIL-based delivery model or service model, augmenting that with Dev and Ops or DevOps, looking at even some of the SRE, so site reliability engineering methodologies, or continuous integration and continuous delivery methodologies. This is all stuff that's certainly permeating or is prevalent in terms of discussions at the moment. So fundamentally, where are my applications? What's the value of the applications? Where's my data? Why is it fragmented? How am I metering my services? What's my cost to serve? What's my cost baseline? How do I move? How secure am I? Amit, thanks very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for that lovely heads up. And I'm sure the spectrum of objectives or drivers is as vast as we can think of. And so what we've done here on is identified or categorized the journey in 3 phases. And I'm sure everybody looks at it in different ways or a different perspective. But from a Veritas standpoint, we have categorize this in 3 simple phases. The first phase is prepare. Now, this is where your core decision making happens. You are identifying a cloud platform, you're identifying your key applications you have, trying to map the application into the right cloud platform. And that's where all your analysis and study comes in. With preparation done, then you actually run with the migrate, and this migrate would be completely dependent on what is the application pattern, application profile, and what is your target platform. So we'll talk about migrate phase as well. But then it doesn't stop here. It also needs to run in the cloud. Now with run, it comes in with its own considerations of, am I running it with performance, as Jeff rightly said. Having the right performance benchmark for your application after it's migrated to a new cloud platform is probably the most critical element of the migration process. So run becomes the later part of this. And then of course, run also has considerations around TCO and overall commercials. So let's talk about considerations that come in each of these phases here. So let's start with prepare. Now, the first and foremost thing, and going back to what Jeff has already pointed out, is to know what you want to migrate and to know where you want to migrate. So key considerations are, identifying where the data is spread out. Now, this could be, the data, if I predominantly look at it, it could be structured data sitting in your applications, in your databases. It could be, something that your ongoing business services are creating and using this data. And of course, there is another piece of data, which is unstructured data, which is where all my objects, my files, my multimedia and content, which is growing at a much faster rate than structured data, is coming in. So it's important to identify both pieces of data. Your applications will give you a clear view on what is the data dependencies they have, but it's very difficult to identify what unstructured data comes in, or where is my unstructured data, who owns it. So having that visibility is key. Now, again, if I take an analogy of migrating or changing from one house to another, I always want to make sure that I don't really take stuff that I don't need in my new house. That's where you take this as an opportunity to optimize and minimize everything that you need in the cloud. So that's where you need to identify and classify what is really redundant, what is obsolete, and what is trivial, and then take a decision based on how you want to migrate that data into the cloud. Now, another aspect that comes in is with cloud migration, you're actually looking at a data center which is not in your premise or visibility. Now, that's where you have to also identify what my compliance guidelines are, where my data residency regulations come in. And each organization has their own standard. It's important to identify what standard or what regulation applies to your organization, and how does the cloud platform, how does the chosen cloud platform really address to those. And then, of course, you have to look at your application portability and its functioning. And that's where, the key criteria come in. Now, again, if you look at this prepare phase, there is no silver bullet of, this particular cloud platform is good versus, I would want to use only this cloud platform. I've seen using multiple cloud platforms just to make sure that they have the right solution fit for their application. Now, once you have all the logistics in place, your migration strategy is in place, is when you actually commit into the migrate. Now, this migrate, unfortunately, is not as simple as, just putting everything in a truck or a rocket ship and taking it to the target. It's absolutely important to know what your migrating process looks like, what your dependencies look like, and the sequence of migration is the key. So, mapping that sequence along with your workload, SLAs. Now, when I say SLAs, every workload is going to have its own downtime allocation. If there are tier one workloads where downtime is actually not an option, how do I make my migration strategy for tier one workloads? How am I going to clearly call out what is the infrastructure dependencies? So cloud technologies will provide infrastructure as a service or even platform as a service. Does it make sense to migrate a physical machine as a virtual machine? Or does it make sense to migrate the application or the database that is running inside the physical machine to go cloud native and use microservices? All of those become a part of your migration strategy. And then that migration strategy could just be converting a physical machine into a virtual machine or making sure that you actually refactor the application or database into a cloud native service. That's where the entire migration process comes in. We have seen that the complexity of this migration process is huge. And that's where, the multiple infrastructure components keep bringing that challenge. Furthermore, we then have the run phase where once you have migrated successfully in the target cloud platform, how am I really going to gain confidence on the performance? What is my commercial avenues that I need to work towards? So these are the factors that come in consideration when you're building onto these phases. Now, moving on to the approach or how Veritas can help, what Veritas provides is a clear way of identifying data and identifying resources that you have within your environment and gives you an end-to-end view of what your storage infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, and backup infrastructure could look like. Now, using Veritas tools and technologies like Data Insight, I can actually go and classify and identify PII matter or content within my file service. So even before it goes onto OneDrive or Box, I know what I am pushing into OneDrive or into cloud. We also have our ability to identify infrastructure dependencies, which then give you a clear mapping of how your architecture should evolve when it's migrated to cloud. And that end-to-end view is always beneficial when you start. We further go into migrate. Now, Veritas tools actually have workflow builders and automation technologies that help you uh, build an automated migration plan. We also enable the migration plan to be tested. So we have non-production impacting testing mechanisms. Now, this is where tier one or mission critical applications come in, where we can actually test the migration without really impacting the mission critical or tier one applications. This migration can be tested. You can build confidence on the migration path. And only at that point, when you are confident, is when you can really commit. And with that, Veritas technology is not being, you know, uh, pertaining to a cloud platform. We can actually give you the right placement option when it comes to that particular cloud platform. So we'll help you minimize or optimize your costs as we go along. And then subsequently, once the migration is complete, we have the run phase. Now, this is where you can actually choose to run in a hybrid model as well. So some customers do prefer running it in hybrid model where my cloud is used for scalable applications where compute can be easily scaled, whereas tier one applications have have a hybrid model where some of the nodes continue to run on-prem, and there are a few nodes which run on cloud at on a need basis. So that's where the scale up of can be leveraged, as well as the resiliency and the solidity that on-prem infrastructure provides can be leveraged at once. We then also have data protection mechanisms where we can build your data protection strategy once you've migrated into cloud. This could include backups, this could include snapshots, this could include application availability across zones and regions. And that's where data can be located as well as protected when we are in cloud. And of course, this end-to-end migration journey is what can be achieved with Veritas technologies. Now, a very quick snapshot or an architecture of how a tier one application deployment in cloud looks like is with Veritas InfoScale, what we can actually provide is an ability to have tier one applications span across cloud technologies. Now, you can actually define your business strategy where you don't want to really lock into a particular cloud platform, and also be able to recover from that cloud platform if there are services that go down. So with Veritas InfoScale, you can actually seamlessly scale between on-prem and cloud, and the application can transparently migrate between the cloud platforms without really having to worry about the underlying technology discrepancies. So this is just one of the architectures that Veritas has built where we can deliver performance. So the application performance is actually enhanced with InfoScale layer running on top of cloud. We can build that resiliency between region failures or even particular cloud provider failure, and have a plan B of migrating into a different cloud technology or migrating into an on-prem solution, all automated in a single workflow. So, this is just one of the examples how a tier one application deployment looks like in a multi-cloud environment. We would be actually, considering the time constraint that we have, we would be actually happy to talk through each and every architecture that is relevant from your perspective. But we would want to make sure that we present all the options that you have in front of you when it comes to your tier one applications. Now, I am going to actually go back to Jeff to quickly summarize on this slide where we have the IT services platform delivering the key objectives for our customers. Jeff, can you jump in?
Yes, certainly can. Thanks very much. So Veritas talks broadly about the notion of what we call an enterprise data services platform. And the reason this is important is because whether it's talking about data protection or data discovery or data recovery or compliance, we have a story and strength in all of those areas. An IT service, so I'm not talking about a single app or a component of an application or a piece of infrastructure. An entire IT service, irrespective of where it sits, requires, in most cases, people to interact with the IT service or the application using service-based orchestration. How do I run book how an application is provisioned? How do I run book the infrastructure layer that needs to scale or shrink or grow on demand? How do I effectively orchestrate the security, the networking, the provisioning, the mobility, or the availability of that application? When we start to look about IT services, we start to talk about different elements of a stack all being stitched together, irrespective of whether it sits in cloud or whether it sits in a data center, in a HCI environment, a private cloud environment, etc. We've got a lot of logical components and a lot of physical components conjoined. If we can't see what's going on from a service management perspective, whether it's capacity and demand management, whether it's understanding in near real time to support incident management or pre and post change validation, how an IT service is stitched together, then fundamentally we've got risk. We need to be able to baseline what we have and what we look like in near real time. DR is certainly something that's become more pervasive. When we look at critical tier 1 applications, we certainly see DR being something that's built in, so we're always on. And of course, if you consider those as core capabilities and then look at the solution sets underneath, whether we're starting to talk about, the growth in unstructured data, whether we start to look at compliance and regulatory capability to be able to map and orchestrate against that, whether we look at IT service-based, infrastructure or IT operations analytics, whether we start to look at data visualization or the availability of whole IT services and their movement, within a data center, across data centers, within the cloud, across different types of clouds to support, migration activity or for permanent relocation. This is something that we're certainly doing a lot of. It's something that's becoming far more prevalent as organisations start to baseline, to move, to refactor, or to re-platform. So we've got a story more or less in all areas here, and the Enterprise Data Services platform is the key to grounding and helping you facilitate the discussion. And it's often a people, a process, and a technology play. So this isn't just about suggesting a specific point solution, it's about talking about how we fit more broadly. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so with that, we are actually going to start answering the questions, because I'm quite pleased to see the questions, being aimed and really being relevant in the content that we've spoken about. So let me start on the questions that we've heard or we've received during the registrations from this week. But, again, feel free to type in your question in the chat window, and as we go along, we'll make sure that we address that question. So the chat window is open. With that, I'm going to start with the first question that we've received, and it says, what size would you say is the smallest that should make this migration process? Now, I'm actually going to go back to my three-phased approach, where we are talking about, plan, migrate, and, run. So when it comes to your plan or preparation phase, it's important to identify what you're actually aiming for, and once you've identified what your workloads really need in the cloud is what will define what size of cloud platform or what size of cloud resources are we going to need. Now, it's also important to identify, your performance metrics, and it's mission critical where, your applications once rehosted or re-platformed into cloud, it's important to be able to deliver the exact same or even better performance in the first place. So, cloud vendors provide different mechanisms of building in that performance in there. It could be, faster class of disks. It could be better compute infrastructure where they've got pricing as well as tiering done based on your CPU and RAM combination. And it can also be on network. So it's important to identify the application profile and then build that baseline of how you want to migrate and what is the minimum set of resource requirements. I hope that helps. We help identify what the resource requirements are. All right. The next question is, and maybe Jeff, I could get your help to answer this, is what do you recommend to customers who use Enterprise Vault for Exchange, who wish to now migrate to Exchange Online, including their EV archives? So Jeff, this is predominantly going into Office 365 migration, if you'd want to take a stab at it.
Yeah, okay. So, look, again, significant amount of shift from organisations, as I'm sure some of you would agree, from moving from on-prem Exchange to O365 subscriptions. I think O365 is a great product. It's something that we use here at Veritas. But fundamentally, I think the market shift, if you will, in archiving has somewhat changed. if I go back only a handful of years ago, I would say 50% of our customers used Enterprise Vault as an example for mail archiving. The remaining 50% of our customer base probably used it for mail archiving and supervision type activity, looking more at risk and compliance and the ability to mine the journal, so to speak, to extract value around different types of conversations, different types of data sources for different business purposes. We see, and I was looking at some data stats recently as well, we're seeing a fair amount of growth, so double-digit growth around archiving for the purpose of supervision and for further abstracting or extracting business value. And as you start to look at moving to Exchange Online, I think the main point I'd leave you with there is to consider the full effect of journaling in O365 natively versus also considering what you want to do with that journal data. So that's one point. I think another point I'd add on to this one, it would be starting to think about the granular level of recovery around Office 365 and other data sources as well, whether we talk about things like Microsoft Dynamics, whether we talk about things like Salesforce, other areas that we do provide, a functional backup capability. The granularity of restore is key. The point or the recovery point objective is key. In many, many cases, as I'm sure we've discussed on other sessions as well, the level of data retained and the accountability for the data that you put into these providers is subsequently the accountability of yourselves as the consumers of these Microsoft or other SaaS-based environments. So I think it's looking at what's the fundamental strategy to get to cloud in this sense in terms of using these SaaS providers. Is a review of, different CapEx to OpEx or different ways of monetizing or consuming and paying for services. But fundamentally, what's the business purpose of the data? Can you recover the data? Can you recover it in the most optimal way possible? And can you actually extract value from the data? And I think that's a key point. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, you made a very, very timely and appropriate point that the key use case from an email point of view has now shifted from archiving into more of a compliance and supervision perspective. So, and tying it back to the objective of migrating to Office 365. Now, what it also, and based on my conversations with quite a few customers, Office 365 has been, has been the topmost adoption trend or cloud platform in the past couple of years. Now, the reason why, and some customers really want to move out of their on-prem infrastructure, which includes their mail servers and mail infrastructure. So if someone is really trying to go to Office 365 to reduce their footprint on-prem, it is imperative that they would want to also have some sort of an on-cloud archiving methodology, or on cloud ability to make sure that we have the archives delivered as a service as well. And that's where Enterprise Vault.cloud also comes in, where Enterprise Vault.cloud, EV.cloud in short, is actually a SaaS-based offering which helps customers migrate to Office 365, get rid of their entire on-prem infrastructure, and still continue to use their legacy archives. Now, this is where your 10, 15-year-old archives, which you've already collected with Enterprise Vault, come in picture. We migrate all of these archives into a cloud solution or an as-a-service solution. And then you don't really lose the chain of custody, or you don't lose your journaling capabilities, even after you've migrated to Office 365. So our recommendation is to explore Enterprise Vault.cloud as your part of your migration strategy to Office 365, and then leverage the same compliance and supervision methodologies that you've been using in your current environment. That's pretty much what I would want to add, Jeff. Thanks. Cool. All right, I am going to move on to the next question. The next question is, what is the basis of choosing the right cloud platform? Um, Again, this is a very good question from a considerations point of view, and this again goes back to the preparation phase of the journey. It's important to identify what your application profile looks like. It's also important to know where what cloud technologies really help and which one fits your application pattern appropriately. So there are multiple criteria that and the considerations that we looked at in the prepare phase are pretty much what will actually help you drive into the right cloud platform. And there is no right or wrong answer here, right? It makes relevance, or it makes complete sense to actually do your analysis based on each and every cloud platform capabilities as well as their cost, and then build that decision. That's pretty much what I would say. Jeff, would you want to add anything on that?
No, I think that's well said, Amit. I think from a cloud strategy perspective, if we look at IT services as a whole, and we look at, and maybe I could cover this further down, but if you look at IT services as a whole, what we are seeing customers want to do is they put critical applications in the cloud, right? In many cases, they want to avoid cloud lock-in as well as application availability. So if you look at the notion of running a key application, could be a database, as an example, a middleware application, or a whole IT stack. If you look at the tenets of what we do, service orchestration, one piece, being able to move or enable or orchestrate ancillary services such as network settings and DNS and all that sort of stuff, or whether you look at the actual application availability itself, and we come right the way down to the notion of orchestrated clustering. So not just clustering at the infrastructure layer, but tying everything together, all of those ancillary services. In many, many cases, it can be as simple as saying you've got one end of an app at one end of the cloud and one end of an app at the other, stretched. So think active-passive clustering. You've got the ability to break off. And if you're clustering and running a service that's orchestrated right across, say, one endpoint in a data center or the other in Azure, or one end in Azure and the other end in AWS, it can be, not always, but it can be as simple as snapping off. And that's one way of avoiding cloud lock-in. We've got customers who are doing that today. They're running across both AWS and Azure, as an example, with another end in another data center. Happy to talk about architectures as to how that's achieved. Obviously, design is a very, very key consideration of that. There's a lot of dependencies to think about. It's quite a complex design, but once it's up and running, really does give you a lot of flexibility.
Perfect. And it actually ties into the next question that we've received is, around what cloud strategy do you adopt, suggest for considering moving a critical application to cloud? That is, what is your consideration process to validate whether the cloud is best outcome for a particular application? So, and going back to your comment, Jeff, it's important to know what performance benchmark you need without really having to worry about the lock-in. Now, if I have to deep dive a little bit more onto that, recommendation or a suggestion, what generally it comes through from a tier one application expectation is availability and performance. Now, cloud infrastructure always, or they give you 5 nines of infrastructure availability. That doesn't mean that the application availability is always going to be assured. So that's where you need to make sure that you have your tier one application availability factored in. This could be using native clustering technologies. It could be, making sure that the application is being monitored. Now with Veritas solutions, and as you can see on the screen, InfoScale is actually a clustering and storage and infrastructure management solution that can actually guarantee application uptime as well as infrastructure monitoring. Now, that actually gives you the combination and the confidence of making sure that your application is as well resilient as a cloud infrastructure. So that's one. From an availability point of view, you then move on to the performance point of view. Now, can be looked at in three ways. The first perspective is, do I have enough compute resources? Now, this compute resources and cloud gives you the flexibility of scaling up and down. So you can actually bump up compute compute resources from a particular node or an instance, and then you can also scale horizontally with more and more nodes. So compute is generally something that you can leverage from the cloud practice. But the most important part comes in is the storage. Now, every cloud provider has tiering of storage done with the class of disks. You can actually choose an SSD. You can actually choose, a spinning disk as well. Depends on what your cost versus resiliency and performance metric is. But a particular platform or a storage type, and your application has started to create data, and you have, data created on that storage, it is then important to make sure that that particular storage delivers the performance. Because migrating from one storage class to another is always data migration and can have impact. Now, this is where Veritas solutions come in, where we build in intelligent caching mechanisms. Now, this IO caching mechanism always has an upper hand or an advantage, because now you're making sure that the disk or the storage dependency has reduced. Now, we can of course go into the deep dive of IO caching and how Veritas technology can help. But I just wanted to bring out the fact that Veritas can help you in multiple ways when it comes to migrating from mission critical applications. Probably a long-winded answer to that question. Jeff, any other comments?
No, I like the comment about the IO caching. It's quite detailed, but I think if you can control the IO and you can therefore cache the IO or queue it up, meaning that you see a momentary pause in an application rather than the fact that it falls over, then fundamentally you're able to control state, and that's something that we've done for a long time. We're just now doing more of it in, with regard to applications hosted within virtual machine workloads, across HCI domains or across clouds. Something especially with regard to SAP workloads that we're seeing a lot more interest in. And there's very few vendors that can do what we do around the whole total stack orchestration piece. And we're the only certified provider to be doing it with SAP, as an example, in the cloud.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jeff. Cool. Moving on to the next question. The next question, again, is on a similar fashion, but I think there is a subtle difference. So how can traditional applications be migrated? Now, when I'm actually interpreting the word traditional, I'm looking at this as, applications which today run on, Solaris or the large scale Unix platforms. Another perspective of looking at traditional applications is, in my experience, the traditional applications leverage shared storage. And that's one of those challenges that we hear from our enterprise customers, is that we've got banking applications, or we've got large scale tier one applications, which have the architecture itself relies on shared storage. Now, with cloud coming in, there is no concept or construct of shared storage in the cloud. How am I really going to overcome that without really needing to re-architect the application architecture? So that's one of the challenges that we've heard. Second is, P2V conversion. Can I really convert my physical machine into a virtual machine? So the short answer to both of this is yes. We, with Veritas technologies and with InfoScale as well as resiliency platform, we should be able to convert a physical machine running, say, a Red Hat into a virtual machine running on AWS or Azure uh, running the same platform. We can also help platform from Solaris into Linux with Veritas technologies, which then gives you a multiple step junction. And then, of course, with Veritas shared storage option in cloud, we can define or build a shared storage model in the cloud without really having physically sharing the disk. So there are multiple ways that we can skin this cat, but yes, there are ways to get traditional applications migrated into cloud. Yep, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk through on that. And then the last question we had was around, in your experience, have you seen customers exiting from cloud platforms? Jeff, did you want to take that?
Yeah, look, I think when we do see customers exit, I don't think they necessarily exit in full. It's just more about, did we put the right workloads in the right places for the right reasons? And in many cases, sometimes this can spurn even things that are in terms of changes in leadership means that directions also change around where things are hosted. But I alluded to the fact at the beginning of the conversation today that I had a meeting with a customer this morning who was talking about, organisations working out what their cost is before they migrate, right? And what we're seeing is, whether it's data movement or infrastructure as a service workloads, or even things like different types of platform as a service workloads, the more you go in, the harder it is to get out. Things like Amazon RDS might be an example of that from a PaaS perspective. But if we look at things like ingress, egress costs around moving data for long-term retention and then having to access it back, and not thinking about how often that data needs to be accessed, often brings about changes in terms of placement in long-term retention strategies. We often see that organisations make decisions to go multi-cloud or want to be able to run applications across availability zones or across cloud providers or in the data centre and in the cloud for certain critical applications to avoid overall risk, if that makes sense to you. Performance and lock-in is another challenge, but in most cases, the times that we see organisations change cloud providers is largely because they didn't necessarily baseline before they migrated. They didn't necessarily look at what's their actual cost to serve before they moved. It's great to say organisations aren't buying any more physical infrastructure. We've got a lot of cloud providers knocking on doors and saying, hey, how do we help you move to cloud? But fundamentally, the cost to serve wasn't necessarily well understood in the first place. And it's having the right ability to be able to visualise, as I talked about earlier, the ability to baseline and understand cost before key technology strategy decisions are made. And I think that's the only guidance I'd give, or the only comments I'd add to that, Amit.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think you're right. Based on my experience as well, unless there is a clear benchmarking done from the cost as well as performance point of view, it's fairly difficult to predict what the cloud technology or platform is going to deliver. So it completely depends on how you started your prepare phase. So that's pretty much from the questions that we've received for the registrations. Just a reminder that if you have any pressing questions or challenge that you are trying to address in cloud migration path or anything around data management, feel free to type it in the chat window. We've got a few minutes to take additional questions if you have anything that is concerning. And it might just be a quick a quick support question as well. Happy to channel it right into the support organization as well. So the floor is open. I'll probably wait for another 1 minute before we can call it off. And Jeff, and we've got a broader team here from Veritas. If anybody wants to make any quick comments while we wait, happy to do that as well. I am again, if you have other questions and if you think reaching out to us directly is more feasible rather than just discussing it on an open forum, feel free to send your question over to us on this DL. You shall be able to get back to you with a response. And of course, if that makes sense that we can have a one-on-one chat and then explore how we can help you better, we're more than happy to jump on a follow-up meeting after this session. All right. With that said, I don't think we have any more questions. Sorry, Jeff, did you have anything?
The only comment I wanted to make was that the note, we've probably spent a lot more time with the slides today than maybe other sessions, but the whole notion of these catch-ups is really for you guys to chew the fat, so to speak. So by all means, you might not feel comfortable in an open forum, and that's fine, but you can throw anything you like at us. You're welcome to give us feedback. We're open to shaping what we're doing here. It's just about an outreach, nothing more than that. So if you've got specific technology challenges, support case queries, things you want to evolve, things you want to do differently, drop us a line. You can even help us shape how we drive these sessions going forward. We're very, very open.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. I think that's all for today. We don't have any other questions coming in. So thank you all for joining in. We will share our next session topic over LinkedIn and our other social media platforms. And I'll look forward to talk to you soon. Have a good day today and stay safe, stay at home, and hope to get back to normal operations soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you, folks. Bye.